All my life I've been called Trey. Every day I have somebody new, either at work or somebody. Because at work they call me Trey, but computer system, everything, it says Donald. So why are you Trey? I've heard that question so many times in my life. Why are you Trey? Why are you Trey? It's because I'm the third, and some people are like, oh, that's so stupid. Oh, da. Like, I don't care. My mom agreed to let my dad name me Donald Ray Tyson III, but she wanted to call me Trey, was the only stipulation. And she thought it was a cute name since I was the third. So I've just always gone by Trey. But I think Trey and the number 3 embody just more than the name I go by every day. I believe the number 3 embodies almost every aspect of my life. I believe that my life has been divided into 3 very distinct parts, and all 3 of those parts have played a role in shaping me and making me the young man who I am today. The first part is my childhood. Growing up, I was the son of Angie Tyson and Donnie Tyson. My mother, high school graduate, a state worker, not very bright, but she was a very loving woman, just as all of my family on her side is. Not a single one of them went to college. Her and her siblings were the first ones to actually graduate high school. So not a very bright bunch of people, but they were still loving, sweet. They might have been racist, sexist, and homophobic, but that didn't stop them from loving our family. My dad's side, my dad, at the time I was born, was in the military. He was a firefighter, paramedic, and at one point a dispatcher for the state police. So my entire younger childhood years were shaped around him not being home, either being in Iraq for the first 3 years of my life, and when he was home working for the fire department. And the first experience I had of my dad actually staying home was in Iraq. He broke his back, and after he broke his back, he had to come home and was permanently medically retired, which affected my family a lot emotionally, structurally, because my dad had made his career based off of his physical work. He was a firefighter. He had to run into burning buildings. He was a paramedic. He was in the Air Force, loadmaster. He had to lift things. So it was a very hard adjustment for him, but something else that I don't really talk about, but like really affected me as a child. Everybody loves to be picked up by their dad as a kid and hugged. And because of my dad's ailment for the first 2 years after he was home, I could never really hug him or give him emotional support for what he was going through. Because of his back, I was afraid I'd hurt him. I was afraid I'd break him. But eventually we got over that, obviously. But one thing I remember from my childhood throughout all this, throughout all the love my parents showed me, there's one moment I think sticks out, was when they got divorced. I remember one particular fight. We were in the apartment me and my parents lived in. While we were in the apartment, I just remember being in my room watching TV as a young 5-year-old does. And I just remember screaming and screaming and just screaming. And as they screamed and screamed, eventually I heard my dad run out of the house and shut the door. And what followed was probably one of the most unbearable moments of my life. The silence, the silence rang in my ears. I couldn't stand it. I laid in my room just crying silently as I couldn't hear anything. I didn't hear my mom cry. I didn't hear her saying anything. That was one of the first times in my life that I heard nothing. And that's what marked my transition to, I think, the second most important phase of my life, was depression and anxiety. Depression and anxiety is really running my family, and it's affected a lot of the people I know and care about deeply. And that moment, when that happened, first exposed me to what it felt like to truly feel alone, to truly feel dark, to truly feel quiet. And from that moment on, I felt bad. I don't know why, but I just felt bad about myself for feeling so alone and for crying. I felt weak. I'd never seen my dad cry. I'd seen my mom cry, but as like a kid, I was like, girls cry. Like, that's just what little boys think. I'd never seen my dad cry. I'd never seen my grandpa. I'd never seen anybody. So I didn't cry. I didn't show my emotions after that. I didn't want to. I was scared. I was scared that if I showed my emotions, my dad would think I was weak and leave again after my parents were divorced. Because he was finally back in my life after Iraq, and even though they got divorced, he was still there for me. I didn't want to lose him. So I went throughout my entire childhood. I wouldn't cry in front of anyone. I wouldn't show any kind of sadness. I just put on my happy front. I just always smiled, laughed. And eventually my parents got back together and everything was looking up again. And that went on for another 2 or 3 years until I was about 9. We got back together when I was 7, went to elementary school, they're happy. My mom had a little girl, my little sister. I was no longer their only child. And then it happened again. My mom looked at my dad and told him she could never forgive him for cheating on her. That every time she looks at him, that's what she thinks of is his mistake. And she left him. And I was left abandoned, stranded and alone in my thoughts again. After that, I started eating a lot more because I used to be a very small, skinny child who loved to play sports and run around. And the only method I knew to cope was to eat. I didn't want to talk about my feelings, so I just ate them away. I put on weight. I didn't talk to anyone because I started putting on weight. Some kids in elementary school, they weren't exactly the nicest people, and they bullied me. Eventually this went on for a few years. I started trying to become more funny, more social, just so people would like me because I just felt alone. But the thoughts, the emotions, everything was always there for me. I couldn't escape the dark, nagging thoughts at the back of my mind. And eventually they got worse and worse and worse and built up. And eventually it climaxed sophomore year. And sophomore year, as some of you know, but not everybody, is I tried to take my life and kill myself. But not only did I try to kill myself, I spiraled into a deep phase of alcoholism, drug abuse, things that were very self-destructive, things I'd learned from my mom's side of the family, the self-destructive abusive behaviors that I'd seen them do, because although they were a happy, not very educated people, they were a rowdy bunch. I'd seen them get drunk on the weekend and beat the shit out of each other until they were bloody, until they were unconscious. I'd seen self-destructive behaviors that had passed down to me, alcoholism, taking pills, and eventually, when I tried to take my life, my addictions had taken over completely, and that was who I was for a while. And then I saw something for the first time in my life that gave me true hope. Whenever I was in the hospital, my dad, my mom, my stepdad and stepmom were all there in group therapy, and they looked at me and told me that I was a lucky kid. Not only was I should have died after I tried to kill myself because of the overdose, but they'd never seen anyone whose parents and step-parents were all in the same room and got along. And from that moment, I knew I was lucky. I was truly blessed by a family that cared for me and loved me. And that made me realize something. Those people are the reason why I am. Because through all the hardships in our life, they never stopped loving me. They never stopped caring. They were always there for me. And I talked about my dad never cried. The first time in my life I ever saw my dad cry was when I tried to kill myself. He looked at me and said, "Was it anything I did?" And I told him no. And that was the first time me and my dad ever held each other in our arms and cried together. And it was the best feeling in the world. And that was that's one of my favorite moments in my life, was when me and my dad just held each other and cried. And ever since then, we don't fight. We always say, "I love you." We get along. My family's one of the major reasons why I am. But there are also people who I'm not related to. The person who I'd say saved my life is Eric Shields. After I tried to kill myself, I asked Eric Shields if I could talk to him. He told me yes. When I talked to him, I told him everything that happened. And we embraced. And he took me to Miss Higgs to tell my parents to get help. But before he did, he just held me in his arms. And I cried. And he was the first person I cried in front of in at least 10 years. And that felt good too. And as I'm crying now, I just think about it. It feels so good to cry. It always does. Crying is one of the best feelings in the world. There's no reason not to let it out. And now I'm in the third part of my life. The young adult, the Trey who cares for everybody, who's passionate, who wants to be a social worker. I just feel obligated, like I owe something to the world. I tried to take away the one thing from my parents they loved more than anything, which was me. And I don't want other kids and their parents to have to experience that. So I want to spend the rest of my life trying to save lives. Not like my dad did as a firefighter, the police department, paramedic. I want to save lives in my own way. I owe it to my parents, to all my friends, to everyone who shaped me. I owe that to them. I want to save lives. And that's why I am. I am who I am because of my family, because of my friends, and just because I know truly that I am blessed.